I'd just like to welcome you today to the National Botanic Gardens. My name is Kevin Kenny and I look after some of the houseplants that you see in front of me here. This is a quick introduction to what they are and what they do. On my left hand side here we have a Livistona australis, an Australian palm tree. It has a palmate shape like the palm of your hand, and it's grown as a architectural plant in gardens in Australia. It can be used as a house plant growing in Ireland. It doesn't like direct sunlight, so you can keep it pulled away from your window to a certain extent, and it offers a architectural and defining space, I suppose. Should be easy enough to get and to grow. Over to the side here we have a large leafy red plant. This can offer you a very bright splash of colour. It doesn't require a flower to do this, and again it's fairly forgiving in terms it doesn't need highlight levels and it needs a bit of moisture to keep it going. So a very nice caladium plant. It can come in a variety of different colours. We're just using this one here to illustrate it. The one here in front of me is Tibuccina, a plant from South America, and again available in larger supermarkets and garden centres. It produces a beautiful blue flower during the summer months in Ireland, but because it's a fairly hardy plant as well, you can grow it outdoors for the summer months. But I know people, and myself included, who have it growing outdoors all year round. It becomes deciduous during the winter and again picks up its leaves as the summer picks up in Ireland. So again, a very, very pretty plant and an easy one to grow and propagate. This one here is a Tradescantia from South America, named after one of the Tradescans. They were Victorian plant hunters. Again, used as a low-level trailing plant, indoor plant in this part of the world. Produces a purple blue flower, very, very pretty, easy to propagate. So if you want to make friends and influence people through plants, you can just break bits of this off and stick it into the bright growing medium, sandy mix, and you'll have a nice new plant to give to your friends. This one here is a very, very common plant. It's a spider plant. Chlorophytum is the scientific name for it. And you can see here there are small spiders beginning to appear at the end of the growing tips. It has a way of reproducing which is known as vegetative reproduction, which is a small plant growing at the end of the tip. It also produces a flower, which you can see here, which is fairly insignificant, and that in turn can produce seed. So it's a very good plant for reproducing itself vegetatively and seed-wise. These two here, this one and this one, these are both aloes. They're not aloe vera, which would be most widely known of all of the aloe plants. These would come originally from South Africa, grown again as a house plant, not direct sunlight, and soil requirements and watering requirements are fairly low. So if you go away on a bit of a holiday, you can leave the plant to its own devices and it will do fairly well. Again, for reproductive purposes, you can break off a whole leaf off it and leave it to dry out, and then put it into a sandy growing medium and you'll have a new plant. Very good again for making friends and influencing people. This one here is a Dracaena, a dragon tree, and again a bit like the palm tree, it's very, very good structural plant. It's Dracaena marginata. Sometimes under the right conditions it develops a slightly red margin here. You can get quite tall. This one, I suppose 5 feet tall or so. It must be about 10 years old. When you're buying it, you get it as a much smaller plant altogether, but given the right circumstances and care, it can get to this height. This one here is one of the ferns that we grow up here in the Botanic Gardens, Nephrolepes. And what ferns tend to offer is, again, not a flower, but a foliage plant. They like very shady conditions and quite a lot of humidity. So a good plant for growing in your bathroom or your kitchen where you get steamy conditions going on and not too direct sunlight. The kind of pots that plants are grown in depends on the requirements. So some of them, if they have high moisture requirements, can be grown in plastic, which doesn't look quite as good as terracotta or clay. So what you can do here is you can get your plastic pot, this one here, which is very good for propagating plants in, and then if you want to, just for the appearance of it, you can put it into a terracotta, which we assume here anyway is a better look. Also, clay pots or terracotta pots give plants a different environment to grow in. So terracotta or clay is porous and it tends to let the roots breathe a bit, but it can also lose moisture. So when plants don't have high moisture requirements, you can grow them quite successfully in terracotta, or conversely, if they do have high moisture requirements, you can grow them in plastic. The plant I'm holding up here is a coffee plant, and again, coffee will be something very, very familiar to all of us, but we'd normally see it either as ground or as bean form. But this plant would originally come from Arabia, so scientific name is Caffea arabica, and it grows as what's called an understory plant, meaning it needs the protection of larger trees growing overhead. If it has direct sunlight, it will suffer. So again, a very good house plant, produces white flowers with a slight coffee scent, and because of its light level requirements can be grown in quite shady conditions. This one here, Succulent, and it has an astonishing colour. It's virtually white, and this will reflect excessive amounts of sunlight from the surface of the plant so that the plant doesn't suffer sunburn. It sounds a bit strange that plants could do that, but they would. The leaves would actually burn on them from excessive sunlight. Very easy plant to reproduce, and there's a Cotyledon growing here beside it for this illustrative purpose of it. This Cotyledon has been cut off the mother plant, and as the end here begins to callus, it dries out and calluses, it begins to develop roots into the air very, very slowly. You can see there's some young leaves beginning to emerge from the stem here, and even though it's not particularly growing in anything, it's using its plant reserves and the root system that may develop. Once this begins to grow, a root system, you can stick it into its appropriate growing medium, which will be a very sandy mix. That will be one that it would normally occur in and has developed as a result of that. So a sandy growing mix is required for these kind of plants. The one beside it here is Gloxinia, South American plant. A plant that leaves are very, if you can feel the texture, very, very furry, so they don't particularly like moisture, too much water. So when watering this plant here, you'd have to water from the bottom, and you do this by getting a tray and putting the plant onto it. You can water it quite successfully from the bottom. Produces a beautiful big purple flower, as you can see here, and that would brighten most rooms. It likes semi-shady or indirect sunlight, and again, it could be grown without too much difficulty. So this has been a summary of some of the plants that we grow here in the Botanic Gardens, and are very easy to grow as houseplants and make particularly good gifts. And if you can reproduce them yourself and pass them on to friends, it has that extra touch to it.